my grandmother, who also was part of this smuggling arrangement. And we basically got out because we lied, we misrepresented ourselves, and maybe even bribed some.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast. Liberty is a state of mind and an ideology that we hold in our hearts. Freedom is much different. No matter how liberated you feel, there are some times where you cannot break free. Often there are powers stronger than any one person can overcome. If a group of people were to come in your house and take control of everything that you hold dear, what would your response be? If the lives of your family were at stake, would you stand up and fight or go with the flow so that they may live another day? It is difficult to know until you're put in that situation. Guarding against the theft of freedom should be one of your primary goals. There are those that have fought and continue to fight to taste the same freedoms we all take for granted. Too many that came before us have not been so lucky to enjoy these gifts. I'm Kevin Donaldson, and unfortunately, Mike Failace has been replaced by Spam and Elvis. And welcome to the Suffering Podcast. If you're a fan of overcoming adversity and overcoming suffering, then we're for you, because that's what we do here, and that's the stories that we highlight. So do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, please comment, ring the bell to get notified of all of our new content. Now you can join. Follow us on all social media so you can find out what we're up to. On this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we have a weary traveler who flew in this morning, somebody who I've really been interested in talking to, because this episode is going to be a little bit of a departure from what we normally do, and that's George Drost to talk about the suffering of freedom. George, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to share my story.
Before we get into anything, let's give a big shout out to our marquee sponsor, and that's Toyota of Hackensack. We don't trust anybody as cops, but we do trust Toyota of Hackensack. So go to toyotahackensack.com. Let them find you a car. They know what they're doing over there. So, George, each week we take a question from our audience. This week's question comes from Coop357. How far would you go to defend freedom?
To the death.
To the death. There's a couple little caveats to freedom. Like freedom is somewhat of an illusion, because total freedom will breed anarchy. I can't walk down the street and punch anybody in the face that I want to. We're all governed by, say, a Judeo-Christian moral or ethic. So I'm going to give you a scenario. And I spoke about this in my opening. Somebody breaks into your house and holds your family hostage and says, if you do not comply, I'm going to take away your freedom. And if you do not comply, something bad happens to your family. But if you comply, they are allowed to live. So what do you think about that? Like, is that still to the death?
Yeah, it is. And I think you're going in a direction I would have gone, and that is, what's the shading? What's the relative freedoms that you are defending, and what would you defend to the death? And so there's a question, do they take away my driver's license? Do I go and pretend to scream and yell and claim that I'll go to the death to save my driver's license? Or is it my life, my ability to make choices and to lead a life that we've been comfortable in enjoying here in the United States? Western-style democracies basically is the route that I would go. And how much restriction do you put on yourself before you can't take it any longer, and that you have to do something to change the course of those actions that are restricting your freedoms?
Because there's many different routes you can take. You have like a Ruby Ridge type of situation where the guy just did not like what the government was doing, wanted to go off the grid, and ended up in a gun battle where people got killed. Who's right, who's wrong, it's not my place to sit here and talk about. But he was technically fighting for his freedom. So for me, I read a book years ago by a guy named Erich Fromm. And I never forgot the name because I went to school with a guy named Erich Fromm. And he wrote this book called Escape from Freedom. And what he basically says is, although you have the illusion of choice, you really don't. So if you have, here's a simple test for you. Go into a restaurant with a menu that's 10 pages long. And you're married. I believe you're married.
Yes, I am.
All right, so you're married. Imagine going into your wife to a restaurant with a menu of 10 pages long. Good luck eating in the next 40 minutes. You follow me?
Yep.
You want a purple car. You're not getting a purple car from the manufacturer. You're given 6 choices, and they limit them to 6. And there's studies out there to show how many choices before people become overwhelmed and paralyzed by analysis. So as much as we think we have all these great freedoms, and in the United States we do, we have to protect what we have because there are certain very important freedoms. So my question is I defend moral freedoms, things that I find, again, getting back to that Judeo-Christian morality, I don't have the freedom to kill somebody. I don't have the freedom to steal from somebody. I don't have the freedom to go punch somebody in the face. My freedoms are for me and me alone until they affect others around me. For instance, I can't light a 50-foot bonfire in the back of my house. I don't have that freedom because there's dangers to those around me. So I will protect my personal freedom until the death, like you said. But at the point where it's only affecting me and not affecting anybody else. So that's my answer to that.
Right, and I totally follow that. Where it's going to Jeremy Bentham and or John Stuart Mill. Those are other philosophers that basically looked at pragmatism, and you have freedom as long as you don't oppress minorities and take away some of their freedoms. So it's really the relativity of it, and you don't have to have let's say freedom to avoid paying to the mosquito abatement district in your locality. Is that something that you'd fight to the death? But you go to the core pieces of if I can't do it, or if I'm restricted in such a way that it does affect the way that I have been brought up, and that the way that the norms that we have that allow you to make choices and not restrict you, and have ease of entry into the marketplace, for instance, for entrepreneurial purposes, or going to a church or not going to a church. Those are important aspects to just day-to-day living. And those are the things I'm talking about, the bigger items. I don't care about a purple Tesla or a purple Toyota. Or
Right.
It's the ability, if it's out there, I can say yes, I can say no, and that there won't be a restriction. But I don't want to affect other people in a meaningful way. And I've had some experience in our local community serving on the Plan Commission. And usually the projects that we see involve some changes that will affect neighbors. And you're going to build a 7 or 8 story apartment building, and the people next door don't want to change because it's going to affect the way that they walk their dog.
Their taxes, their school system, on down the line.
But the density, the scaling, there's a whole series of issues: sight, smells, sounds, those kinds of things. And what you have to do is you have to create that balance. And the end result is that there has to be some sort of ultimate harmony. It's never 100%. Boy, that developer's got a great idea. 7 stories, there'll be a restaurant down there, there'll be swimming pool, there'll be dog parks. Let's buy into it. Where the other side, the neighbors who are going to see their tranquil little neighborhood change with the addition of smells and sounds and just the congestion that goes with it.
There's also the wolves that are looking out to capitalize on those people wanting true freedom.
Yeah.
Prime example of that is something that you lived through, and it's an interest to me, is the hippie communes of the 60s. All right, they were great in some things, but do you see any hippie communes laying around now? Because inevitably somebody went in there and said, oh, these people, they want freedom and love. Well, I might have a little unethical or nefarious purpose behind me, and I'm going to capitalize on their wants and desires. And then they come up, and then you have like a Jonestown type of thing. So it's a weird thing to try to wrap your head around. But yes, for my personal freedoms, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'll
and
fight to the death.
it was expressed to me in one way about liberty and libertine, that liberty comes with responsibility, and libertine attitudes or conduct does not. So there's not only just having freedom, but that freedom is a responsibility, and that when you gain liberty, you need to be able to create the constructs to preserve it in a way that benefits most of society. You can't do it for all, but most of society. And being an attorney, there's such a strong emphasis on rule of law. And the rule of law is really sort of the composite of corporate thinking, corporate in the sense of people in the community, and to come up with solutions and ways to live with one another, be
It's a,
kind to one another.
it's a great question. I think we could go on for hours on this one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can.
So Coop, 357, thank you for sending that in. Keep sending in your questions, and we will try to get them on the air. We love thought-provoking questions like this. So you came from one cold city to another cold city.
Actually, this is a colder city than the city I left because our our temperature and weather basically is behind us, and you're going to get warmed up.
Yeah, so we're talking about Chicago, or the Chicago area.
Chicago area.
Chicago area. It's an interesting city. We talked a little bit about the history. By the time this airs, you and I will both have come back from Creative Con, and I'll get to experience a little bit of it. There are some key sites because I'm a history guy, which is why your story resonates so deeply with me. There's some pieces of history in there that I really, really want to go see. I want to see where Al Capone hid the vaults from Geraldo Rivera. That's exactly what I want to go see.
Good luck. Good luck.
So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah,
Don't leave out your daughter because
No.
she's our mutual connection.
Yeah, well, I have to thank my daughter, Julie Loken. She basically connected Kevin and myself up for this podcast. And part of it is Julie's interest in podcasting and media, and I call it sort of the communication business. And it works on different levels. But Julie, thank you. And now we'll work a little bit backwards because I came to this country in 1950. And I can't do the math because I'm too old to do math. I think it's
74 years.
73, 74. And depending on when you strike the anniversary date. But we came from the Czech lands. It was called Czechoslovakia when I left it. And it was due to a loss of freedom. We'll keep that theme going here. In 1948, in February, there was a communist coup d'etat. Some people call it a putsch, some people. And it was my dad, who was an attorney, who was basically threatened with loss of not only his profession, his freedom, but his life.
But there was also a Sophie's Choice going on in there.
It was.
And I know some backstory to this. So how many siblings do you have?
One.
You have one. So two of you, your father, your mother, older?
And my brother, Rudy.
Your brother?
Who's older brother.
Older brother. And not all could go.
No, not all could go. But it was a complication because I was too young. And basically, if traveling at a young age and blowing cover by screaming or yelling or crying as a 1-year-old wasn't very good in 1948.
You had to go undercover and sneak out.
I was smuggled out.
You were smuggled out.
And I don't remember it, but from the stories, it took a lot of courage on the part of a lady that that basically impersonated my mother, and she was she did a great job. She was able to do that. And my grandmother, who also was part of this smuggling arrangement, and we basically got out because we lied, we misrepresented ourselves, and maybe even bribed some
It's amazing
local,
it's amazing what you'll do for a taste of freedom.
and it was then connecting up, getting through the what was a little bit pre-Iron Curtain, but it was still starting to come up and became very restrictive, where you couldn't come in and go.
I had this story affected me. One of my favorite teachers when I was a kid, I'm kindergarten, so we're going back 45 years. His name was Oleg Gorbenchikov. That's how much this guy affected me, that I'm able to remember that Russian name. Him and his wife were Russian Jews, and they had to get out of the Soviet Union because at the time the Soviet Union was not very Jewish friendly, and so they actually went out via Japan. But I remember as a little kid him telling how he had to hide in a garbage can to get out of Russia, to be smuggled out of Russia. I think his wife wrote a book some years later, but what a great man and what a great giver to children that he was, that he affected me that much. And that story stuck with me for 45 years. I mean, how many stories do you remember from when you were 5 years old?
Not many.
Yeah.
And as I get older, I don't remember much anymore. So, but it was a struggle for me to kind of go back into my my 3-year-oldness and try to remember what things could you remember? What did you remember? And I do remember we had a housekeeper that lived with my grandmother, and I was basically shuffled between grandmothers so that I wouldn't be put on any record or roll in a census, so I could still maintain anonymity. It was that kind of cunning that helped the escape.
Well, this is how bad, I want to paint this picture. This is how bad it is, where people will risk a 3-year-old's life in order to get them out of a very bad situation or a potentially bad situation. I want everybody to think about that for a minute, because take your current life right now. First of all, stuff like what you went through could never happen today in the digital era. You could never be anonymous. There are no people off the grid. There is a digital footprint for every person on the planet right now. So back then, they had to hide you, smuggle you, pretty much keep you quiet. And there's a little taste of this if you look at in Godfather 2 when Vito Andolini has to get out of Corleone. Same thing. You know, you get caught, the consequences of this person taking you out of that country illegally, imprisonment. You're in a communist country, so
oh yeah,
you go,
and that there was an interesting story. I was involved in my legal career, and still am involved in this, is in legal exchanges between the United States and the Czech and Slovak republics. And in one of our programs, we went to, we'd go back to Brno, where I was born, and then have certain activities. And one was going to a prison near Brno. And just talking to some of the officials there, we met with individuals who ran that prison. And they gave us sort of an overlay of what occurred there. And they talked about the criminals that they had. Many of them had mental problems, and you had thefts and burglaries and assaults, serious assaults, and sometimes even a murder. And then I asked this prison official, what about political prisoners? You know, do you have any history of that? And they just went dumb. They didn't remember. They had no corporate memory of what it was like during the communist times. And this was the Sela prison in Brno. And this was the price my grandmother paid after they found out she was complicit in my being smuggled out of the Czech lands.
She was imprisoned?
She was in prison for 2 years.
Wow.
And it was rethinking, re-education.
You got to remember, too, that while the Czech Republic had the coup and was now communist, we all know who the real leader at that time of the Communist Party was. And we're talking about one of the biggest despotic rulers of all time, and that's Joseph Stalin in Russia. And it was Stalin died in 53 or 55 or something.
53.
Yeah.
And I just learned, and you can check this out, that the first U.S. person that was informed about Stalin's death was Johnny Cash.
Really?
That's
That's a great trivia question right there.
Well, there's some controversy to it, but it's gained a little bit of currency. But he was a decoder in the military, and he was able to get these codes that were coming out of Russia, and after they were decoded, Joseph Stalin is dead. Well, I believe it was 1953.
So you have to really think about how dangerous Joseph Stalin was. Joseph Stalin, when he died in 1953, let's use that for devil's advocate. He was placed right next to Vladimir Lenin in his preserved state, same way Lenin was preserved. And I don't know exactly the time frame of how long he was there, where people could visit in Red Square and stuff. And then for something happened where he was taken out of there and buried under 50 trucks of concrete because he had killed, they don't know the number, they think upwards of 25 million people in the gulags. So you went to prison in a communist country. It's a dangerous situation. It's not like you got a possibility of parole, even though they might say it. It's touch and go there for a while.
Yeah, due process and rule of law wasn't really used a lot in the communist legal system. It was more expediency.
You know how many people these days, because communism is all but eradicated. You got Cuba, you got China. The basic philosophy behind communism is from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs, as Karl Marx wrote. But it's inevitably in all those communist countries, you have your elites and then you have your peasants. Mm-hmm. You know, it becomes a caste system of sorts like that. But in where you were in Czechoslovakia, you left one bad person, and then you got taken over by another bad person. Czechoslovakia has had a past of just terror that has run through it. And that's kind of why we're here today, to talk about your father, who was kind of like this very silent hero, this person who did a lot behind the scenes because of whatever moral code he had in his heart. And one of the things people got to understand also is and we're talking about Nazi Germany,